Good evening, one all present here. Government College of Technology, Coimbatore, GCT Alumni Association, and Voice Service Club of GCT Youth genuinely presents the wonderful webinar series, Great Conversation and Talks, bringing GCT alumni back to campus. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the 12th edition of our webinar series, that is Future of E-Commerce in India. Let me extend a warm welcome to our eminent guest speaker, Mr.Subbu Palaniappan sir, an alumnus of GCT, alumni of GCT who are gathered here, all the student members of Voice Service Club of GCT Youth. With this welcome note, I am going to introduce our guest speaker. Mr. Subbu Palaniappan sir have completed his bachelor degree in mechanical engineering in Government College of Technology, Coimbatore at 1999. Also have completed his master's degree in science, industrial engineering and operations research in Virginia Tech Institutions and completed the Master of Business Administration from University of Chicago. Sir has held various leading roles in many industries. Now Sir is leading the Amazon Prime in India. In this wonderful occasion, I have to thank our respected principal of GCT, Dr. P. Thamaremam, and Secretary of GCT Alumni Association, Dr. V. Prasanamurthy sir, and whole the GCT Alumni Association and student members of the Voice Service Club of GCT Youth for the support to successfully presenting the series. As a request, participants please stay muted during the session. If you have any queries, you can put in the chat box. Sir will address the question. Now I am handing over the session to our guest speaker, Mr. Subbu Palaniappan, sir.
Thanks, Anandakumar, for your introduction. And good evening, everyone, members of GCT, current students, alumni, staff, and professors. I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak to you all today. As Anandakumar mentioned, I graduated from GCT in 1999 from mechanical engineering. And during those times, we didn't have all these informative sessions. So I'm really happy that current students or alumni are taking effort to put this together to drive awareness about different technologies, career paths, and so on. I think this is a fantastic effort. And when I was approached to talk about e-commerce, it's an area that's very close to my heart. I readily agree to it. So I'm looking to share the future of e-commerce, where we have been and what the next 5 years looks like. The objective of today's session is to give current students and maybe alumni who are contemplating a change in their career and are considering e-commerce some very basic information, right? I expect at the end of this course, 40 minutes, you'll know, some of the e-commerce trends, where the industry is heading, what opportunities are available for, let's say, current engineering students, and how to break into the e-commerce industry, basically. So that's my objective. I would like to keep the session as interactive as possible, and please feel free to, put in your questions. And I'll try to answer them. And Anandakumar or Pradeep, if I'm not following some chat messages, please do help queue some of these questions so that I can take them as we go through. So I'll, a little bit additional introduction about me before I get into the topic. So I lead Amazon Prime in India. For those of you who don't know Amazon Prime, it's Amazon's subscription service where you pay 1,000 rupees a year and you get a set of benefits, right? Like free 1-day, 2-day delivery, access to latest video content, music content, gaming content and such. We launched Prime in India in 2016. That's when I moved to India to launch and lead Prime. So I've been with Amazon and have been leading Prime for the last 4.5 years, and have seen e-commerce evolve during this period. So I'm looking forward to sharing some of my learnings and my predictions for what the next 5 years looks like. So, it's no secret that e-commerce is thriving in India, right? And there is significant potential for future growth. So, if you look at the retail industry in India, it's about $850 billion in size, and it's probably the fourth largest retail industry in the world. And if you look at the e-commerce penetration within this market, it's about 3.4%. So only 3.4% of that 850 billion is online commerce at this point, right? So it goes to show, in spite of all the growth that we have seen, like we are a small drop in the ocean, and there is significant potential over the next 5 years, 10 years. And I would say if I look at the growth over the last 4 to 5 years, it's been around 30 to 40%. And I fully expect it'll like be around the 30 now. Given COVID and more people adopting e-commerce, I expect it to be like closer to 40%. And we are expected to bring about 300 to 350 million shoppers. Currently, there are, I would say, anywhere from 120 million shoppers. But over the next 5 years or so, we are expecting it to be around 350 million shoppers. And if you look at the growth story in India, over the last 5 years, there's been a huge growth in internet penetration, enabled by low data costs. So that has really helped power the growth of e-commerce in India, and we fully expect that to continue. If you look at mobile internet users, if you look at cell phone users in India, right, there are about 1.1 billion users, out of which 650 million of them have access to internet in their phones, right? And around 300 million to 300 million have what you call as a smartphone that helps you enjoy online commerce, online entertainment, and so on and so forth. So if you really look at the key impetus for growth in India, has been it has been on the back of growth in telecom industry, right? And people having access to cheap data plans, low cost smartphones. So we've grown on the back of those, and both the industries continue to grow. And as I said, like, see, 30% growth, if I were to give you a comparison, if you look at, let's say, software industry, right, like the Infosys and the Wipros of the world, they probably grow at around 10%. That industry as such grows probably at 10% a year. And if you look at fast moving consumer goods, it grows anywhere from 4 to 8% of growth. So having an industry like e-commerce that is growing 30 to 40% growth is phenomenal, and probably one of the very few industries in India that's growing at this rate. The last point I want to mention here is there is a difference between e-commerce growth in India versus, let's say, in the Western world, right? Let's take US, for example. The growth in India benefits, it's a very, what we call as an inclusive growth story, right? It benefits customers and sellers, because all the e-commerce providers in India are marketplaces. So a marketplace is where sellers are able to sell their products and consumers are able to buy. The Amazons, the Flipkarts, the Snapdeals of the world are just providing the technology and logistics platform to enable those transactions, right? So what's unique about India is, as e-commerce grows, there are millions of sellers that are able to get onboarded and are able to have a reach beyond their particular geography. I've gone throughout India and met sellers who for example, I met a seller in Jaipur for who the market until like he entered e-commerce was maybe Jaipur and a couple of 100 kilometers around Jaipur, but now he has access to customers throughout the length and breadth of India, which I think is very fascinating, right? At Amazon, we our mission is to transform how India buys and sells, right? It's not just about buying; it's about selling as well. And I think that's a phenomenal part of the e-commerce growth in India, right? People are able to establish a market beyond their physical store or physical location, and customers are able to buy across the length and breadth of India, right? Like imagine sitting in a place like, let's say, Tamil Nadu or Kerala and being able to buy art from Rajasthan, rugs from Rajasthan, or hand woven stuff from Kashmir. I think some of these were not possible before e-commerce. So I think that part around inclusive growth story is very exciting. Um, so it's growing. How would growth look like, right? So if you look at the last 5 years, for example, or maybe 5 to 8 years, the growth has been concentrated in the metro cities, right? Like take the top 10 metros in India. I would say they probably contribute to about 70 to 80% of e-commerce transactions, e-commerce customers in India, right? So we call this the first 100 million. And I believe the reason growth started from these cities is people who live in these top 10 cities, right? Like Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, Hyderabad, and some of these Kolkata, some of these big cities. Have high income, very educated customers. They are, as a result, they are fast adapters of technology. The infrastructure to serve these cities is really good, right? So it's no wonder that 70 to 80% of our growth of our first 100 million customers came from these cities. Now, if you look at the next 100 million, it would be very different from what we saw in the first 100 million, right? The next 100 million is going to come from a big portion is going to come from tier two cities, right? Um, be it Salem, Coimbatore, Thrissur, Hubli, like take any of these places, right? Like this is where I think the next 100 million are going to come from. And when you think about this next 100 million, they're very different from the first 100 million, right? And, there are going to be more women shoppers in this next 100 million. And also there are going to be a growing segment of 18 to 35-year-old customers. So if you look at any city, right, like the first one to usually adopt a new technology is going to be, the younger population. So as we are thinking about the next 100 million, it's probably going to be in tier two cities. It's going to be people in the 18 to 35-year-old. Who are going to be adopting this. And another unique thing that you'll see in this next 100 million is most of them are non-English internet users, right? So if you take what's been built for the first 100 million and provide it to the next 100 million, you're going to fail miserably, because the first 100 million is like, very similar to a Western population, right? They travel extensively, they have high disposable income. Usually they are very comfortable with English, and it's probably the most commonly used language. Whereas if you look at the next 100 million, they're probably more value seeking, right? And they are probably more comfortable in a local language. And they're probably first-time internet users as well, right? So you need a different mindset to grow in these next 100 million, right? Within my team, we talk about India not being one India. There are many Indias within our country, and I feel the role of everyone in e-commerce is to identify the many Indias, right, and customize offerings to support growth in those markets. So, as I was saying, you need a different set of capabilities, right? We feel that as we get into this next wave of e-commerce shoppers, you need five unique capabilities: omni-channel experience, vernacular content and multi-modal guided shopping, uh, personalized shopping driven by machine learning algorithms, private labels, and ecosystem capabilities to address challenges to shopping online. I'll spend maybe 3-4 minutes on each of them, and then towards the end we'll talk about how to get into e-commerce industry. So that's my plan for the rest of the session. So if you think about omni-channel experience, right? So let me take a step back and talk about what do we mean by omni-channel experience, right? Like typically so far, most of retail is single channel, right? Like either you have an offline store, you walk in, you buy, or you have an online store like Amazon or Flipkart or Myntra, and you go you buy a product and it shows up in your home, right? What we feel is as we get into the next 100 million, you can't pick one or two channels. You need to have a combination of these channels, right? I'll give you one example. People in let's say tier 2 markets, they like to look and touch and feel the product, right? One of the biggest challenges in e-commerce is you're not able to provide the touch and feel experience, and we spend a lot of time coming up with solutions to emulate the touch and feel experience. But at the end of the day, in spite of all our best efforts, you can only go so far, right? So you need an omni-channel experience where, let's say, you're able to order online and go to the store, try it. If there is any alteration required, you can alter it using a tailor there, right? So you need to have couple of channels available, because the customers in these markets, their requirements will mean that you need these multiple channels. So I've given some examples of omni-channel experience, right? And omni-channel experience is not just about picking the product, right? Like, hey, going to a store and picking the product, right? It spans the entire gamut from shopping recommendation all the way to delivery, right? So let's say you are in a mall, and a push notification based on your location and shopping history, right? Like we recognize that hey, you're probably there to buy a shirt or a t-shirt. We send you a push notification to say that hey, here are some latest offers that are available on Amazon or Flipkart or one of these e-tailers. The second is providing personalized solutions such as tailoring, right? Clothes, buying clothes online, it's while it's growing, there are so many challenges in that, right? Across the length of and breadth of India, sizes are not uniform. People have bodies are of different shapes. So one of the biggest barriers to online shopping in clothing is people feeling that it won't fit them well, right? And they might need to do some alterations, right? So providing personalized solutions such as tailoring, trial at home options, try and buy, right? I think that's one option. Customers to indicate which store he or she would like to visit. If you consider high value purchases like buying a washing machine or buying a refrigerator, customers do like to walk into a store, look at it before they buy it, right? So you need both a offline as well as an online experience there, and provide easy fulfillment options, right? Like some people like to pick it up at the store, some people like home delivery, and other options. So the summary of this slide is, as we think about penetrating into tier 2, tier 3 cities in India, you need to use multiple touch points. I give you an example of some innovation that we have done at Amazon as an example to bring this to life. So at Amazon, we have a program called I Have Space, right? So basically, if you're a Kirana store, you can partner with Amazon to deliver products in that locality. So the logic behind this is, when we deliver products, we don't know each nook and corner of India, right? The neighborhood store probably knows their neighborhood inside out. They probably know the houses, the names of the people in those houses, right? And so what we thought was more efficient to deliver all the products for that locality in that store, and the store owner can employ someone to go deliver it in their neighborhood, right? It's called I Have Space, and the store owner, who's a regular store owner, like he makes some additional money because they are partnering with Amazon to to service this last mile, as we like to call it, right? That's an example of a multi-touch point experience that like we are providing in bigger cities. And this can only increase as we think about tier 2, tier 3 cities, right? And so that's just an example of how we think about omni-channel and multi-point experiences. Any questions so far?
No, sir, no questions from the audience.
Okay, great. All right, I'll keep going. Second is vernacular content and multimodal guided shopping. So what we mean with vernacular here is, as I said, as we go into these tier 2, tier 3 markets, providing a shopping experience in a regional language is very important. Right, a very simple example, right? My mom lives in Coimbatore. I bought her a smartphone, and these days in Android, like you can choose your language, right? And she has Tamil, and she's much more comfortable using the phone than when she had a prior phone where she didn't use a regional language setting. So I think to penetrate the different regions of India, we need to be able to communicate in a language that the customer is comfortable with. So providing a vernacular shopping experience, I feel, is foundational. It's not optional, it's foundational for you to penetrate into these markets. The second is voice shopping is going to be increasingly popular. Customers are going to be more comfortable with it. When you think about voice shopping, if you take a step back, right? We had web pages, I don't know, 30 years ago, 20, 30 years ago. And then we went to apps, right? Maybe 10 years, 15 years ago. I feel that the third generation of this evolution is going to be voice-based, right? Everything is going to be voice-based, because if you think about a typical tier 2, tier 3 audience, they are like, the reason they don't want to use technology is they don't know how to use, right? But if you make it almost similar to talking to a human, I think you're going to have a huge adoption. And right now, you see, like, you can go to any of the apps out there. Lot of voice-based activation is coming on board. It's right now it's limited to voice searches, right? Like you can go in any of these apps and say, like, hey, show me a table, for example, and you should be able to see a set of choices. But increasingly, you're going to go further into the shopping experience, right? Customers will be able to add the product to the cart. They'll be able to choose what delivery options they want. They'll be able to tell what payment experience, like, whether they want to use a credit card or a net banking and so on and so forth, right? So the idea is very simple here, right? As I said, in any online commerce, the aspiration is to bring the experience as close to real life as possible, right? And when you walk into a store, you talk to a person, right? You don't like enter something in a screen. And that's really where we are going here. The third related to that is chatbots. Having a conversational shopping experience to drive question and answers, because these are customers who are coming to e-commerce, coming to online experience for the first time. They're going to be having questions, right? And being able to have conversational chatbots is going to be very important, right? Like no one, especially people who are coming for the first time, don't like to pick up the phone, call a 1-800 number and stay in line for like 15-20 minutes to talk to a customer service agent, right? So conversational chatbots are going to be very important. The last is video, right? One important distinction between India and some of the other markets is, in India, people like to listen to a video, right? It could be an instructional video. India is not a market where people read. So that's why if you go to any website, right, you would see there would be more pictures, there would be more videos, rather than like if you go to the Western world, a lot of the content is written. So that's a huge difference. So short form videos are going to be very popular. So there are a couple of questions in here. Please elaborate about technologies used regarding this point, how present students can learn them. So let me park this question towards the end. So there is, towards the end, I have a slide around how students can, enter into e-commerce, right? Like what are some opportunities available? What background do you need? So I'll elaborate on this when we get to that. The third is personalized shopping driven by ML algorithms. So machine learning, the earlier question was around technologies, right? Machine learning is going to revolutionize every industry that's there in the world, right? And e-commerce, with its penchant for adopting new technologies, has already adopted machine learning in a big way. I've given you some examples here. Let me pick 2 or 3 and talk through them, right? Address intelligence, right? One of the things that we don't realize is when we shop, there is a very simple field that says, address. And like there is a big difference between address in India and address in the Western world, right? In the Western world, if you put an address in Google, like literally you stand in front of the door of that house, right? But in India, address formats are not standard, right? People will say, hey, like, my house is behind this temple on this road. The formats are not standard, right? People are also, very liberal with how they write their addresses, right? So it's a huge, believe it or not, companies like, be it the Amazons, Flipkarts of the world, be it the Swiggies of the world, they spend an inordinate amount of human and capital investment in, in making this a highly structured space. So incorrect PIN codes, critical address fields missing, incomplete addresses, these are all huge problems, right? And I'll talk about an experience at Amazon, right? So we have invested so much in machine learning, and we are able, like, as you start typing your address, we surface you an address that is as close to the address you're typing as possible, right? So if you say a Government College of Technology, like, 58 Tadagam, you start writing Tadagam Road, like, we'll probably surface that Tadagam Road, Coimbatore, 6410, we'll auto complete it for you, right? So there is a ton of investment going in this space. Same with product recommendations, right? Being able to mine the customer shopping data and recommend products to you, right? Like, let's say I bought a Louis Philippe shirt, I bought a medium size and I had to return it, and let's say 6-7 months down the line I'm about to go buy a Louis Philippe shirt and I'm still buying a medium size. I should be able to be like, we prompt customers and say them, hey, like last time you bought a Louis Philippe shirt medium size, it didn't fit you and you had to return it, and do you still want to go ahead and purchase it, right? So a simple example of how we are able to mine your shopping data and surface relevant information for the customer. And there are a couple of other examples in terms of product search. I think this is a very interesting use case, right? So when you go search on any e-commerce website, right, there are times when you're specific and there are times when you're not. And an intelligent e-commerce site will detect when you're specific and when you're not. I'll give you two examples, right? When, let's say you have an interview and you want to buy a white shirt, right? When you start typing white shirt, all white shirts are very similar, right? So we will surface in our search results, we will surface the white shirt that is closest to you, right? Like maybe there is a white shirt that's stored in the warehouse in Coimbatore, outside of Coimbatore, so that you can get that within a few hours, right? Whereas, let's say you're searching for OnePlus Nord, right? There you're specific, right? If you start typing OnePlus, we can't give you like a Samsung, right? So we'll surface the exact OnePlus, right? Even if it is not in Coimbatore, let's say it's in Delhi, that's what we're going to surface to you, right? So putting intelligence into product search is a huge area, and a ton of machine learning investment has gone into it. I think there are some questions. Sorry. So, so the first question is, can you briefly explain how SEO is used effectively for marketing, right? We do search engine optimization. It's a bread and butter, right? And I think the challenge with a horizontal player like Amazon, or like a Flipkart or a Snapdeal is you have to optimize for keywords across categories, right? So there are teams that does that, but it's there used to be a time, let's say 7-8 years ago, where SEO was considered like cutting edge, right? Now it's become so foundational, right? Like if you're any company worth its salt that's online, you have to do it, right? And for you to stand out, you need to use machine learning and other like latest technologies to be more predictive, rather than like when you do search engine optimization, all you're trying to do is say is like, hey, the guy searched for this, like, how do I make sure that like, my site is tagged to that particular search? That is more like, reactive, right? Like the technology has gone to more predictive, right? Like if one of you are thinking about shopping some for a white shirt, right? And then when you buy a tie, like we should be able to recognize that like, hey, you are like probably preparing for an interview, and we should be able to surface, hey, do you need a folder for your interview, right? one of the, when I used to work in US, one of the retailers was able to do this so well that they could predict when a woman is pregnant even before the woman knew she was pregnant, right? By being able to track, their change in purchase behavior, they were able to tell that this woman is pregnant even before she knew about it, right? So, to answer your question, like SEO has become very basic. Now we are going towards more predictive of what customers would want, right? Um, we always feel happy when, even take our personal life for example, right? If one of your friends comes and says, hey, I bought you this whatever ice cream while I was there, the fact that hey, it's hot day and he or she bought it, gives us happiness, right? So whenever it's a surprise, whenever someone is able to guess what we want and act according to it, it brings a lot of customer joy. So I think that's where the industry is going. The next question, it seems more like a comment. Make it easy for customers. Okay, so the question, there is a question in here. With Amazon and other e-commerce companies making it easy for customers to choose from anywhere and anytime, do you think this is aiding globalization or regionalization of supply chain, or a mix of both? Actually, this is a really fantastic question, right? Let me give you two markets and how they are very different, right? And some of these markets are also kind of merging. So if you consider US, for example, it was a very centralized supply chain, right? Amazon, for example, if I go back 10 years ago, we probably had 4 or 5 distribution centers throughout America, and we were able to ship across the length and breadth of America, right? Contrast that with India, right? Where the regional supply chains are becoming more popular, right? And the reason is infrastructure is very different across the length and breadth of India, right? And infrastructure is very different. The second is air capacity. Air transport capacity is extremely short in India. For a country of our size, the air cargo capacity, you'd be dumbfounded to hear how small it is, right? So you can't ship products that easily across the length and breadth of India. The third is, as Indian customers are becoming more comfortable with, large and bulky products, right? Think of like washing machine, right? You don't want to send a washing machine from Mumbai to Coimbatore. So I think as the product categories evolve, it's very important to have regional supply chains as well. So so the answer to your question is, in India, it's evolving into a more, a regional supply chain for some products. For some products where you can't afford a lot of inventory, wireless is a great example, right? Each phone is 40, 50 grand. You can't have a regional supply chain because the inventory carrying cost is going to be huge, right? And you're comfortable, shipping those products across the country, right? So I would say 60, 70% of our supply chain is regional. The other 30%, 40%, it flies. And if you look at US is beginning to adopt that model, right? And the reason US is going there, and even in India, it's going to become more and more regional. And I'll tell you why, right? Because as people get more comfortable with e-commerce, their demands are rising, right? There used to be a point in time where customers were comfortable with, having products shipped in 4 days. Right now, the norm is 1 or 2 days, right? I would say in the next 2 years, people would look at 2 days as something that's unacceptable, right? It's going to be few hours to a day, right? So to do that, you do need all these regional supply chains, right? I would even go to the extent and say local supply chains, right? That's very important. So let me continue with the presentation, and then I'll come back and take some more questions. The fourth one is, private labels, right? As we go into more and more tier 2, tier 3 markets, value for money is going to be important, right? If you look at, soft lines as an example, right? When I say soft lines, clothing, people are going to want more value for the money, right? They don't like, some of these customers don't really care about the brand. So there is a lot of opportunity for private labels, especially in fashion, in appliances to come up, and that's a good news for manufacturers as well, right? Think about being a manufacturer in Coimbatore, and let's say you're producing. I'll give you an example. There is a vegetable chopper called Ganesh chopper. You should go look it up on Amazon. It's such a simple vegetable chopper. It's run by a woman, and the amount of sales that she does on Amazon is incredible, right? So, like, it's an example of a private label, right? Like that she's created and she's selling it on Amazon. So, with the growth of private label helps growth of small entrepreneurs in smaller cities to be able to sell their products throughout the length and breadth of India. Moving on to the last capability, right? Ecosystem capabilities to address frequency, payment, and infrastructure challenges. The way I would start this slide is, challenges are plenty in India, right? There are regulatory challenges, there are infrastructure challenges, there are human capital challenges, weather challenges, name it, like, there is a huge challenge in India. Excuse me. I think great e-commerce companies are able to work around those challenges, right? And I'll take online transactions as an example, right? We've never talked about payments so far. Digital payments is exploding in India, but there are a number of challenges with the digital payments, right? Like if you take net banking, right? Like all of you guys would have used net banking at various points in time to pay for your purchases. The net banking success percentage in India is probably 60%, right? So out of 100 transactions that are done on an e-commerce site using net banking, 40% of them fail, right? And it's really a bad experience for tier 2, tier 3 customers, right? Like let's say my brother or my mother do a transaction and it fails, like they'll call me and say like, hey, would they have taken my money because even though the transaction failed, is there a chance that they could have taken away my money, right? There is plenty of innovation to be done to improve our payment experience. The second is credit facilities, right? Credit facilities are not very, popular in India, or not widely available, I should say. That's changing, right? Like with the EMI and no-cost EMI transactions. So, like you can do a ton of innovation in the ecosystem, right? Payment. Logistics infrastructure, product delivery, and how easily products can be even returned, I think is a big focus area. So, these are some of the capabilities I think will drive e-commerce growth over the next, 5 years, 10 years or so. The next slide, I wanted to spend maybe 3-4 minutes on. Hey, like, is e-commerce for me, right? I'm an engineering student. I want to enter into e-commerce. Is e-commerce for me? Or I'm a, early to mid-career alumni, and should I consider e-commerce? A couple of things that come to my mind, right? I always tell my team, a rising tide rises all ships, right? You can be the smartest person in your class, but you have to be in an industry that is growing, right? And I would say there are probably very few industries in India that are growing at 40% CAGR. year over year, and are projected to grow 40% CAGR year over the next 5 years or so. So e-commerce is a fast growing industry, and the second is the opportunity to transform the lives of people across the length and breadth of the country is just phenomenal, right? Like, and I'm not saying this like a PR speak or anything, but you could like I have met some of these sellers, right, who come from very small towns and who are so appreciative, and it has elevated their families, right? Like they're able to provide more for their kids' education. They're able to employ additional people. So the transformative power of e-commerce in India is just phenomenal, right? Like that's why I say it's a very inclusive growth industry. So if you believe like, hey, these are good reasons to get into the industry, what are some opportunities that are available for people, right? So entry level opportunities. So if you're an engineering graduate coming out of college, entry level opportunities are usually in business analytics, machine learning, software development and operations. I think business analytics and machine learning are like very hot. People with a good analytical bend, who understand, analytical tools, and machine learning tools are very successful coming out of engineering colleges. I would say that like to grow within e-commerce, an MBA from a premier institution is typically preferred. Like when I look at my team, for example, I would say 90% of my team has an MBA. But anyway, I wouldn't say that's representative of all teams at Amazon or all teams within e-commerce. But like if you want to grow within e-commerce, an MBA helps you to understand, different perspectives, right? I don't know how engineering education has evolved, but like when I was at GCT, it was very pure engineering, right? Like you learned about, like in mechanical engineering, you learned about very core subjects. You didn't learn about, how to do analytics or how to run an operations and things like that, right? So an MBA helps bridge some of those gaps. And in terms of the skills valued, right, customer obsession is very, very important in e-commerce, or for that matter, any online experience, right? Lot of companies and industries use the word customer friendly, customer obsession, but I can tell you that like only 5 out of 100 or even 1,000 really mean what they say, right? You have to where true customer obsession comes is if you're able to sacrifice profits in favor of providing a better customer experience. That is where true customer obsession comes, right? That's where usually the rubber meets the road, right? Like a lot of companies say like, hey, but we'll make more money doing business this way, and over time they lose their customer trust. So customer obsession is very important. Analytical thinking is very important, right? I'm eternally grateful to GCT for developing, or not even developing, putting in place a foundation for analytical thinking, right? Being able to think why certain things work a certain way, why do they not work a different way? That is analytical thinking, right? You can be in any branch of engineering and still develop that, right? Be it mechanical or electrical, instrumentation engineering, any of it, being able to clearly articulate cause and effect, I think is very important, right? Like I think that's what most of analytical thinking is. Good written and oral communications are very important. GCT provided a great platform for me to, be part of TechnoTrust, other functions, events, be able to speak confidently. So I think oral and written communication is important. And the last one is a bias for action, right? E-commerce is a very, very fast moving industry, right? You need to be on your toes. You need to be able to do work. things move in minutes or hours, not weeks or months, like in other industries, right? So like even like when I hire people, I look for people who, who are enthusiastic, who have shown examples of, getting the job done, as we call it, right? So that bias for action is very important. So that's all I had. I know I've taken more time than I had originally planned, but I'll open it up for questions. I think there are some questions that are in the chat. So let me see if I can take some of these. How, please explain how you realize the transition of engineering to e-commerce field, right? See, I think the answer to this is, in this day and age, what you study is less important. I feel it's less important, right? Like whether you're studying, mechanical engineering or, let's say commerce or like electrical engineering. I don't think companies, big companies focus, they like to hire from good institutes, don't get me wrong, but what you study is less important. How you think is very important, right? So irrespective of your field of study, develop a appreciation for questioning things, develop an appreciation for getting into the details, right? Like, going back to my mechanical engineering days, I've never used mechanical engineering, by the way, ever in my life. But I enjoyed being able to explore, like, whether it's heat transfer, why heat transfers a certain way in a certain object versus others. That curiosity is very important, right? That curiosity is very transferable. You don't need to have an MBA in e-commerce and other things, right? The next one is, please explain the journey of your life from GCT to Amazon. See, as I said, I graduated in 1999. Right after that, I got a placement through campus, but I chose to go for my master's. I did my industrial engineering and operations research. Then I worked in supply chain management for about 6-7 years. And I've always wanted to do an MBA, right? Like ever since, maybe even the GCT days. So I ended up going to University of Chicago. For those of you who don't know, University of Chicago, our former RBI governor, Raghuram Rajan, teaches there. In fact, he was my professor while I was at University of Chicago. It's a great school. And from there, I spent, around 7 years in consulting. I was with Buil and Company. And then I decided to come back to India. I explored a few options, met with the CEO of Amazon India at that time. And the opportunity to launch and lead Prime was very exciting. And here I am 4.5 years later, have been extremely happy about the journey. Prime is one of the fastest growing membership programs. It's the biggest membership program in all of India. And it's a household name. So I'm incredibly fortunate to have had this experience. There are a couple of questions in here. The first one is, hey, how do you maintain the delivery charges constant? See, every e-commerce company, there are two things that we focus on, right? There is ongoing operational excellence improvements, as we like to call it, right? If you look at, like, if you've been shopping at Amazon, you would see that, like, 6 years ago, we used to send, 2 or 3 shirts in a big box, right? And now, we are like sending it to you in like a bubble wrap kind of thing, right? Like that's an example of operational improvement, right? How can you improve your current processes better and better? Then there is new innovation, right? I would say launching Amazon Prime in India is a new innovation, right? Like 5 years ago when I joined this job, like people were like laughing at me, like, hey, why would you launch a subscription service in India? People in India don't know what a subscription services, right? But like now, fast forward, we have millions of members throughout India, and it's the most loved membership program in India. What are the goals of Amazon Prime in India? My goal for Prime in India is to be the largest and most loved membership program in India. I think we have made a huge progress towards that. 85% of our members are satisfied or very satisfied with our service, right? That kind of customer satisfaction is very hard to come by. So, I think we are there. We still have a long way to go. I would love when, we are so penetrated that, like, you can go to a tier 3, tier 4, town or village, and people are able to recognize Amazon Prime. That's my ultimate goal. Do you recommend students to opt for higher education or take up a job after BE, right? It's a very good question. I've reflected on this quite a bit, right? I think it depends a little bit on what you want to do. If your goal is to do get into management, and, like, let's say you want to do an MBA, I would highly recommend working for 4-5 years. I know it's not the norm in India, but if you go to any other country outside of India, you'll not find a classmate in your MBA class who's less than 4 or 5 years of work experience. And I think that 4 or 5 years of work experience helps relate to the content in MBA better. Irrespective of that, like, even if you don't want to get into management, and let's say you want to go for a master's, I would say like 2 or 3 years of work experience always helps. It helps to help you figure out what you want and what you don't want. It helps you figure out what the real world out there is. And most of all, it helps you learn how tough it is to make a living out there, right? Life skills, as I like to call it. So I would highly recommend someone work before they go for their masters. Yeah. At how much rate have you bought these movies? Sorry, unfortunately, we're not allowed to disclose some of those. How merchants' products will show up in top of searches results in Amazon or other based on rating tree data structures or some other algorithms, right? So, I'm not a technical person, so I don't know how to answer this question technically, but there are hundreds of people working on search ranking, improving search results, improving the relevancy of search, improving like items, right? Let's say you search for Dabur honey, right? Like, maybe we don't have Dabur honey, but we should be able to show you like Tata honey, right? I'm not aware of all the technologies behind it, but it's a very important area to that we invest on to improve customer experience. Are there other questions? I think I've answered most of them.
I think there was one question about Neuralink in the previous chat, sir.
Sorry, unfortunately, I have no idea what Neuralink is. Okay. I think there are a couple of questions coming in. What are important technologies future generation students have to learn, right? I think I'll go back. I think there was a question in the beginning of the presentation that I kind of punted towards the end, right? I would say machine learning and artificial intelligence are technologies that will probably control everything that we do over the next 10-15 years. I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, we are probably at a 2, and over the next 5 years, we'll probably be at a 6 or a 7, and so on and so forth, right? From everything from smart roads to self-driving cars, to companies are trying to even predict what you're thinking, right? I think machine learning and artificial intelligence comes very naturally to engineering students because you understand some of the logic behind it, you understand some of the technologies behind it. So if any of you are interested in having a career in high-tech space, right? Be it in the Amazons or the Googles, of the world. I would say investing time and effort in those two might be a worthy experience. Is there a book or video that has inspired you much? Um, you know, I would say until a year ago, I was not much of a reader. Over the last year or two, maybe I've read some books, and my choice of books are very different. So I can't give you a generic answer for this. Like, it depends on the type of books that you read. I don't like fiction, right? I like non-fiction. I like to read about people's experiences, right? It could be experience like, running a company. A recent book I read was Bob Iger's Ride of a Lifetime, the Disney CEO. It's about his experience, running and growing Disney. I enjoyed that. It needn't always be about business. Another book I have enjoyed thoroughly is When Breath Becomes Air. It's a story about an Indian brain surgeon who ends up having brain cancer and dying, right? And like literally the last chapter in the book is written by his wife after his death. So I like books about reading about other people's experience. That's my type of book. Uh, um, how can you benchmark GCTians with IITians, right? It's a good question. See, if this is from a current student, I was where you were 20 years ago, and I would bet that GCT has grown leaps and bounds in these 20 years, right? I think there is no point feeling that like, hey, I'm not at an IIT, I'm at GCT. I think GCT is a phenomenal college, right? I wrote a couple of weeks ago in LinkedIn that every place, every person has something to teach you, right? We can't be looking for a specific thing across all people, across all institutions. We need to find what that place is good at, and we need to assimilate that. It might not be applicable right then, but I'm pretty sure that it'll become applicable later on in life. And when I think about GCT, I have to tell you guys a very interesting story. So at that time, I don't know how engineering education has evolved. At that time, you need to go to counseling, right? Like there were DOT 1 and DOT 2 colleges. DOT 1 is like GCT, PSG, and CIT, and like, DOT 2 was KCT and so on and so forth, right? So I was like, when my marks came out, I was never a big fan of chemistry. So I screwed up my chemistry. So I like, even though I did really well in math and physics, I could only get into a DOT 2. But like the cutoff mark moves, and then like, you might get an opportunity to get into DOT 1, right? So I was one of those people who barely got into GCT, right? But the couple of things I picked up from GCT, every single person I went to college with, right? Like I was in the batch of 99. I think Professor Elamati, who is probably there right now, I was in her batch. Every single person, and I'm not saying this out of humility, every single person was much smarter than I was, right? So GCT allowed me to up my game, right? And like really compete with them, right? Like that's where I would say I figured out like, how to like constantly upskill myself, right? I think that's one. The second is it also is a place that teaches you how to do more with less, right? Being a government institute, like there are only so many facilities, right? Like, but how do you make do with all of that and still come out successful is a very important life lesson, right? So I would not like, this is a very vicious cycle, right? Like, hey, I'm not at an IIT, I'm not at an MIT, or like, I'm not at a Harvard. It's a never ending cycle, right? I would just like ignore all those. You're in a phenomenally great college. Hundreds, maybe thousands of very successful alumni have come out of it. I'm sure most of you, when like I really hope most of you in this call 20 years later are sitting in my shoe and like, kind of giving the same feedback. So just don't forget that you're in a phenomenal college. Can you share contact details to able to reach out? Yeah, I'm available on LinkedIn. Quite active there. So look me up, send me a request, and it'll be good. See, I'm very eager to help people, but at the same time, I also want to help people who have specific questions, concerns that I can help with. If someone is contemplating career choices, if they want to run past something, I would love to spend time with them. So more specificity rather than generic questions help me add value. I think those are all the questions. Pradeep or Anandakumar, anything I've missed?
I think you covered pretty much all the questions, sir. So I think we can ask for one last round for questions from the audience. I think that was really interesting questions, and thanks for all those answers, sir. It was really exciting to hear from you.
Yeah.
Let me hand over the session to Sundar.
Yeah.
There was a last question, like, can you share your placement experience?
My placement experience, I was the mechanical placement rep. I don't know if there are placement reps anymore, but I was the mechanical placement rep. I got placed in TCS. I did not join them. I went for the higher studies. I have phenomenal friends. I was a day scholar, right? At least at that point in time, like 95, 98% of the people used to be hostlers, right? And there were like 2 or 3 of us like me who were day scholars, and spent a lot of time just like bunking in the hostels, developed some phenomenal friendships. I think that's in conclusion I would like to say I think you're in a extremely fortunate, gifted place. You have to, like, in the core of your heart, believe that it's a great institution. It's been around. Like, now engineering colleges are popping up everywhere, right? But to be able to tell, about a college that was started, decades ago, is very hard to come by, right? And the quality of staff is also phenomenal, right? The Professor Ebenezer, who just passed away recently, was one of my professors. Professors like them were just phenomenal, right? Like, they taught you not just about your education, about your textbooks, but also about like life experiences, how you need to talk to people, how you need to always aim higher. So I would like to end this session with just use as much as you can, right? Help each other out. Seniors helping juniors, and juniors paying it forward, and so on and so forth. It's a tribe. I had a professor in business school that used to say that if you're married and you don't like the person, you can divorce the person. You can't divorce your alma mater, right? Like, forever you're tied to GCT. So make it count. Make it count for yourselves, and make it count for your fellow students and other alumni. And I wish you all the very best in life.
Sir, first of all, I need to thank the speaker of today's session, Mr. Subbu Palaniappan, sir, who spent his valuable time with us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and giving me an opportunity to share this. I think it's a great initiative, as I said in the beginning. When I was in your place, I had no idea about emerging industries. I think this is a great forum to help educate students on career options that are available. I'm happy, hopefully after all the coronavirus dies down. My parents still live in Araspuram, so I'm there all the time. Would love to visit and help out in any way I can for the college.
Yes, sir, exactly, sir. And then I need to thank our honorable principal, Dr. P. Thamara Madam, who continuously supporting us to run this session. And also I need to thank the secretary of the GCT Alumni Association, Dr. V. Prasnamuthi, sir, And then I need to thank the Vice Club of GCT Youth as well as GCT Alumni Association who's running this session successfully. And finally, I need to thank all the participants who all are gathered here. I hope that it was a wonderful session for you. Thank you all. Thank you once again, sir.
Thank you.
So participants can leave the meeting room.